childhood up, we have had to conform to a certain social game. And so we're in a constant state of competition. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.
Welcome, everyone, to Friends of Failure. I'm your host, Sam, and this is my co-host, Megan.
Heyo.
Today, we have a very special guest. I would like to introduce you to Christine McKay. How you doing?
Hey, great to be here, both of you, Megan and Sam. I really appreciate it. So excited.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, we have a fellow podcaster here with us today.
Yes, I have a podcast called In the Venn Zone. Venn is VENN for the Venn diagrams. So I have my logo, company logo is a Venn diagram. I am a professional negotiator and the CEO of Venn Negotiation. And all agreement happens at the intersection of you, your counterpart, and the situation you're negotiating.
Oh my gosh. I just got the logo now. That's amazing.
And I'm also the author, just recently released and #1 Amazon new release in multiple categories of Why Not Ask, a conversation about getting more. I'm super excited about that.
As you were talking about that, I was waiting for you to tell us that you had a career in the FBI and you took that and then, brought it over to your company. Well, and maybe that's just years of growing up watching Hollywood movies of like negotiation isn't just a, hostage situation, right? So what got you into that field?
Yeah, I mean, you make a really good point because a lot of people think about negotiation as just being hostage negotiators, which if you're negotiating in your business like a hostage negotiator, you have huge problems, or attorneys. And if you're negotiating in your business like you're a lawyer, then you also have big problems. So I started out negotiating almost 30 years ago, and I kind of fell into it a little bit. I had started working for what's now Verizon. I started out in marketing and I hated it. And I found a way into working in international finance. And I started out, my first major deal was in Jakarta, Indonesia. And I was working in Southeast Asia. As a woman, I was 28 years old at the time. I was leading negotiations with ministers of finance, ministers of telecommunication, and senior executives of major quasi-government owned entities. And I found that I really loved it. And there were no women in the room at all. I worked in Asia for a few years. Then I started working in Eastern and Western Europe, where there were also no women at the time. And what I realized is that I really loved creating the opportunity for people to find agreement and to be working toward a common objective and to figure out how to get large numbers of people all on the same page really excited me. And it required analysis. So I love the mathematics that's required in understanding your numbers and how do you make sure that the deal economics work. I love that part of it, but it also requires a real love of people and a belief in humanity, because humanity and our life experiences are the two things we all bring to the negotiation table. And then I love words. I actually love contracts. Contracts are the storytelling part of the negotiation. Every relationship is negotiated, whether it's formalized in a contract or not. And when it is formalized in a contract, it tells me the story of what that relationship history has been. And that helps me to think about where do we want to take that relationship going forward. And so that's how I came into it. I launched Venn Negotiation because after negotiating with almost half the Fortune 500, I started seeing how smaller businesses get kicked around and get kicked in the gut, kicked in the teeth, and kicked elsewhere, and by larger corporations. And I wanted to find a way to help level the playing field for them. And so I launched the podcast to bring guests from a wide range of backgrounds and industries to talk about their negotiation stories I wrote the book because that's my big thing. People say to me, if you could go back to your 20-year-old self, what would you say? And I'd say, why not ask, right? Why not ask for more of what we want? And so the book is all about helping people learn how to do that. And then I also do consulting services where we provide negotiation services to clients. So.
Wow.
That's an awesome journey. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so much passion.
And what's
I love what I
do. What's wild about that is, it sounded like at one point in your life, you're paving the way. And then you get to this certain point where you have, that passion. And so you acted on it. And now there's a book and there's a company, there's a podcast. But, we struggle as a society where we see all these things that you've accomplished. And it's hard for us to ask the question of that didn't happen overnight. I mean, that took a lot of experience and learning, right? I mean, you were on the, other side of the planet doing this. That's wild. Now, looking back, were there things that happened early on that helped you get into being, because I mean, part of why maybe you like and enjoy negotiations and contracts is because once you started getting into it, there were things maybe from your past that kind of made it easy for you to enjoy negotiating.
So when I was in high school, I grew up in north central Montana in a town of 500 people in the middle of nowhere. I mean, we have a couple claims to fame, other than that I'm from there. That's not a huge claim to fame yet. But one of the senators for the state of Montana is from my hometown. Some people like him and some people don't. And then the bass guitarist and co-founder of Pearl Jam is from my hometown. Jeff Ament.
That's a pretty good one.
Yeah, he is absolutely our most famous former resident of town. And when I was in high school, it was really interesting. I had what most would look at as a successful high school career. I was an honor student. I competed in public speaking. I was a beauty queen. I went to Europe as an exchange student. And I did all these really amazing things, but I was also really, really bullied and treated very horribly when I was in school. And my brother was too. And it wasn't necessarily the safest environment for me to be. I was sexually assaulted. All the horrible things that happened to young girls happened to me when I was growing up. And so I had this kind of divided world. I had this world that I lived in at home, which was really negative and not a lot of joy in that personal world. And then I found a way to create joy in my professional school world. But I did that by really pushing to make sure that when I decided I wanted something, I pushed to make sure that it happened. Whether it was, math teachers who didn't believe that girls needed to do well in math because girls should be home and pregnant anyway. So I don't care about teaching you, to saying to the school system, I want a woman who's going to teach advanced biology because I refuse to take chemistry and physics from these two teachers who I know have no interest in teaching me. And the school did that. From, saying I want to take a business class, that the school said only people not going to college can take that class. And I said, I need to know how to balance my checkbook and then how to manage my finances. I'm taking that class. So when I was young, I was really pushy about I was really kind of is it okay to swear on this show?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So I was a complete process fucker. So, right. Everybody
I love that.
goes, was going down the road, going down the path. When you're in a town of 500 people, you develop a reputation when you're in kindergarten and you do not get to change it very easily. You're stuck with it. And so people hated me because I was a process fucker. When someone said, you can't do that, I said, watch me. I'm going to go prove you wrong. And I did it over and over and over again. But when I graduated from high school, about a year later, I unceremoniously discovered that I was pregnant and I had just lost my job. My the guy who was my child's father left. He just split. And I remember being super angry about that. And because I'd lost my job, I got evicted from my trailer that I was living in. And I started living in the back of my car. And I became part of what in the United States we call the hidden homeless, meaning that I had no address, I had no permanent address, and I waffled between staying in my car to staying at a friend's house. And for 6 months, I lived like that. And I met a guy who I thought was going to be a nice guy, and he wasn't. He ended up not being. Initially, he kind of was. And he took me in, and I thought I needed to give up decision-making rights over myself to somebody else, because clearly, as an adult, I was incapable of making good decisions for myself. So I abdicated that responsibility to him. I had 3 kids by the age of 22. And I wasn't allowed to work and go to school, but my husband at the time couldn't support us. And so we did all of our grocery shopping at the local food bank. We boiled water on the stove to give kids baths on certain days. We moved from Montana to Massachusetts at the time. And one day I couldn't feed my kids, and I hit a breaking point, and I said, this is enough. And so I decided I needed to renegotiate my life. And I did. And I fell in love with negotiation because I was put in a position where I was forced to have to ask. I had to learn how to ask in order to survive, and in order to give my kids a different life. I left that person, and it became a single mom of 3 kids, who are 5, 4, and 3, and created a totally different life. Went to school, and ultimately I earned my MBA from Harvard University. But there's been failure getting to there, failure after there. I mean, failure is a prerequisite for success.
Exactly. It's just a part of it. And
it is totally part of it.
I just want to, as a woman, just going through your 20s in general, you forget how much choice you have and what's happening, because my situation was definitely not the same as yours. But there is a point where you just kind of go along with I guess this is what I need to do right now. And you forget you can question your own life and negotiate that. And you kind of go through this realization, and people do it at different ages, but I definitely relate to that, where you go, oh, I don't have to do it like this anymore. There is another way, and I can, even though it's really hard and I can't see the path right now, I can figure it out.
And I think that's true for all people, certainly for women, especially once we have kids. There's a societal pressure that for women that says you should be sacrificing everything for your kids. Mm-hmm. And, kids are a burden. I mean, there's joy in being a mom. Absolutely, there is joy in being a mom. But I have to say, as a young mom, I was a terrible mother when I was a young mom. I was horrible. I was angry all the time. I couldn't provide for my kids. I had 3 kids pulling on me all the time. I do not look back fondly at that point in my life. But I have 3 amazing women as daughters today who grew up and are just remarkable women, in spite of what their mom did to them when they were young. But yeah, we all have choice. And choice is hard. One of my, I have a black belt in martial arts and in Kung Fu. And one of my instructors said to me once, he's like, Christine, people are kind of screwed because we're composed mostly of water and electricity, and water seeks its lowest level and electricity seeks the path of least resistance. And so anytime we want to choose to make a change, we are trying to go upstream when water's trying to take us down, and we're trying to go against the path of resistance. We're going against resistance. And so when it's easier and we're naturally designed to go toward the path of least resistance, which is maintaining the status quo. And so you're right, we have that choice, and we can choose to change, or we can choose to stay the same. And either way, choosing to do nothing is still a strategy.
Yeah.
I think
I was just gonna
Go
say, I
ahead.
have this poster in my house that says choose either to evolve or repeat, and that's it. But,
Oh, I like that.
yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. I think it's interesting because it instigates a lot of thought in my head of, you know, situations where my back was against the wall, or people that I knew well enough to hear their story of when their back was against the wall. And I think it's interesting where, you know, I already made that point of, you know, it's really easy to go, oh yeah, like she's an author and has a podcast, but like the things that you had to go through to be able to survive to get to that point, right? And I think it's really interesting that you see it on TV shows, or, you know, like if you're watching a YouTube ad and it's talking about like, hey, you want to get rich, but you don't want to do anything to get rich. Like all you have to do is just buy my thing and like, bam, here we go. And what's weird is that there are people that created companies and maybe they want to help people, right? But advertising it as like, hey, I can just show you the ins and outs and like you just do it overnight seems crazy, right? Because I was told one time, hey, if I had all the answers, right? And one of those was like, hey, just do this exactly as I say, you'll have $1 million in a year. You probably won't do it. And I was like, what do you mean I won't do it? And they're like, because you have no reason to break your comfort zone, right? You might be like, I want $1 million. But if you're sitting there and you're making 50,000 a year and you're not struggling to feed kids or your car's working fine, right? It's pretty easy to just go, I'm gonna stay right here. This isn't so bad, right? And I think it's wild because I wonder too, like how hard do I have to be pushed before I go, hey, I need to evolve instead of repeat, right? Because it's not always like a very extreme circumstance, but by golly, it sounds like yours was, it got wild there for a second, I think.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely did. I mean, I was fortunate because I met the man of my dreams, and I've been happily married for 28 years. We've been together for 30 years. And you know, for my kids, he's their dad. And
Awesome.
you know, he's been hugely supportive, but there's still been failures, working for somebody else and getting laid off, or getting a bad review, or almost losing our house. Or when I was at Harvard, my ex-husband sued me for custody of my kids. As he was trying to it was a money grab for him. And, you know, and I let that event, oh my God, I gave so much control to that event for so many years, not many months, but many years. That is like when people say, what is, like, if you go back in time and you say, what is your biggest failure? My biggest failure was, even though I was no longer married to the man who I had abdicated decision-making authority to for so long, for 7 years. Even after I was divorced from this man, I was happily remarried. And it was many years later, I was still abdicating to him. I still gave him control. When he sued me for custody, it completely rearranged all the chairs on deck in terms of how I saw my career. And I settled in my career because I was afraid, I was terrified I was going to lose my kids. I would come home from classes, I'd rush home. When other people were building relationships at Harvard, I was rushing home because I was worried that somebody was going to show up and take my kids away from me. And one day I showed up and there were police cars and fire engines and all sorts of things. And my kids had gone into the house and there was a door that had not been locked or something, and they were freaking out. And so they called the cops, and I was, oh my God, it was a thing. And I let that situation drive my decisions for my career for over a decade. Over a decade, I sat in that and I gave that control to somebody else. And I didn't realize it until probably 4 years ago.
Wow.
It's hard to see it when you're in it, though. Like, it's really difficult because it's just, at that point, you're just trying to survive on that issue alone. And I see a lot of our failures you see in retrospect, and it's hard to catch in the moment. And that's okay too. Like, have you felt that of just accepting I can't regret it. I can't go back and like accept this sooner.
I certainly don't. I mean, so that yes, it is a failure, but it's not a regret.
Yeah.
So I have like regret is, I don't understand. It's not something I really understand. It's like, if I make a decision and I don't like the outcome, then make a new decision, but don't fret about the outcome of the decision you made because you thought you were making the right decision. At the time you made the decision, it was the best decision you could make with the information you had. So it's not like I look on it regret. Do I wish that I had done it differently? Yes. But did I have some amazing things that came out of that experience? Absolutely. That if it hadn't been for that, if I hadn't let that drive my career, I wouldn't have negotiated with almost half the Fortune 500. Negotiated with 63 of the Fortune 100 that are on the list this year. 63% of them I have had some level of negotiation with. That's a lot. That's a lot of big companies. That's a lot of big companies that I understand how they buy products and buy services. I understand how they teach or don't teach their people to negotiate. I understand that dynamic, and I can take that learning and I can help smaller companies figure that out as they're trying to grow and improve their where they're at in their world, or help them sell more successfully if they're selling or their business or buying another one. And that's really exciting for me. I wouldn't have had that experience without sitting in that, in that situation for so long.
It's a really good
Uh,
point.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say it's a really good point because a lot of people mix up regret and failure. They kind of use it interchangeably, and it's not the same at all. You can fail at something and be like, that was good, I needed that. And I think I finally come to that same point in my life where I used to like think over the same issues over and over that had happened to me and regret how it had happened. And now I'm like, that made me who I am. And it was terrible. It was not fun. I would not want to experience it again, but I had to experience it during that time.
Yeah, I think, over the years I've shifted to where I think it was regret until I eventually took the responsibility to go, well, one, I'm not in that anymore, right? Like for whatever reason, whatever my actions were that led to the thing that I felt the emotion of regret, like I'm not there anymore, because it was like, wait a second. And then I like changed the course. But I think another thing that was interesting, I guess in the more recent years, is that I was like, why am I in such a hurry to like go? Right. Because it's not like I'm trying to hurry up and grow up at this point. I was just in a hurry. And I realized that I find a lot of comfort in hindsight, because now, like all three of us, we can sit here and we look back and be like, man, when I was like 23 and this was happening to me, like, oh my God, I didn't handle it the way I would handle it now. But, for me, that's 10 years ago. Again, just like you said, right? The things that I knew then versus what I know now are, I mean, it's a whole paradigm shift, if I'm honest with you, right? Like, and I hope, I have several more before my time's done, because that's what's really uplifting, is being able to look back and go, hey, I changed my course and like, look, I made it, right? But I think it's also kind of unusual because we all know that at the very end of the story, we don't make it. And so, you know what I mean? Where you're like, like, well, what does that mean, right?
This is where it gets dark.
Yeah.
No, I don't think this is dark. I think so. The lesson that I've learned is I have to say, different people have reacted differently to the whole COVID thing, right? So, and for me, COVID has been an amazing period of time. Now, I've lost people, and I hate that I have lost people. I have friends. At one point, I had 17 sticky notes on the bottom of around my computer showing me all my friends who had lost people to COVID. And so don't mistake that for my saying that I am so grateful for having had this last 19 months. But I'm grateful for it because two things. One, I've gotten to see my husband every day, and I love looking out my little recording booth that he built me and seeing him working in his genius. And I never would have gotten to see that. I would never have had that visibility into that part of his life had it not been for a COVID-like event. But the other thing is that I have learned in this last 19 months to fall in love, not with the outcome, but the process of getting to the outcome. And when you learn to fall in love with the process that you're going through, then every day is part of that process. And it makes it a million times easier to fall in love with wherever you're at this moment in time, because the outcome is less important to you. It's what am I learning on the journey? It's we all know how our story ends. Every one of our stories ends. It ends. It is a definitive end. Our time on earth comes to a definitive end. So all we have is the journey. It's all we have is the stories that we get to experience along that process, along that timeline. One of the women on my podcast, her name is Megan Gardner, and she sits in this amazing space because she works with kids doing live action role playing. She had a company for over 20 years that's done live action role playing for kids, and she also is a hospice care worker. And she said to me, she said, Christine, she's like, we on our headstones, if we have them, we have the date of our birth and the date of our death, and our entire life is represented by the dash in the middle. Like, what do we do with that dash, right? That line is the journey, right? And when I figured this out just not long ago, just through COVID, it's my greatest epiphany through COVID is to love the journey. You know, have goals. Absolutely. I have very specific goals. They're written down. I've got numbers to them, all that. But I'm less fussed about them because if I love the process of getting to them, then the outcome is just going to happen. The right outcome is going to happen.
I was kind of actually talking a little bit about I guess the mentality of being positive that the blessings or whatever you want to call them that are supposed to be in your life are coming, and they are there, right? So that in which we need is provided by, you know, the universe or however you want to talk about it. But what's interesting to me is that as you were saying that, I was kind of going back to that and realizing that that's what I want myself to do, right? I want to be in love with the process of, you know, I'm about to be moving, and moving is not a task that I just start high-fiving people
Not
and
fun.
like, you know, doing backflips or, you know, calling up like my best bud and being like, bro, you're not going to believe what I'm doing, unless I'm like calling him to come move stuff with me, right?
You're doing it
and,
too.
but like the thing is I can tell you sitting here in this conversation that as I daydream about, hey, what is it going to look like being in that new space after a couple of months? By that time, it will be the new home. It'll be the new routine, right? And instead of taking this exit, I take this exit. And I guess like I'm calling myself out on this episode of like, that is something that I could really be doing, that maybe I've done before, but I don't make it it's not my natural habit to go, okay, hey, this isn't great. I'm moving. This isn't my favorite thing in the world, but man, it's going to lead to new doors and new adventures and experiences, you know?
Can I ask you a question?
Okay.
To bring it into the present, right? So one of the things that, you know, people often live in the past or they live in the future. And it's very hard for us to stay focused in the present. So when you were talking about moving, I'm looking at all those photographs. And what I'm imagining in my mind is you packaging up those photographs and wondering which ones you linger on just a little longer because they bring a memory to you that you hadn't thought about for a while, right? So when I say fall in love with the process, that's what I mean. That process of moving, the process of packing up, and, you know, it's like, ugh, it feels awful, but it gives you a chance to take stock of the stories that have come, that you've carried through with your life. Every one of those photos behind you, there's a memory attached to them. And some of those memories are stronger and more potent than others. And so I wonder now I'm hoping you'll email me to tell me which photos you lingered on, because you hadn't thought about that part of the process being part of the process and falling in love with that aspect.
Yeah, it's even
I
the
just wrote
mundane
down
things.
I just wrote down top 3 photos. So when that happens, I got you.
Yep.
I can just see you crying.
Yeah. I just send like a very like public video of myself on like Instagram of me just bawling and being like, and in this picture, and be like, okay, well, he's very present now.
He's gone.
He's too present. Dial it back right now.
No such thing. It is no such thing.
Well, and that's the thing is, I kind of laugh because I feel that my mind goes really, really fast. And sometimes I wish that my body could do the same thing, right? So, there's this weird feeling of wanting to be the Flash, but only in the sense of the superpower, right? To be able to I can get all these things done. And then when I'm done with it, I can just sit here and be present. But like the reality here is that you just have to choose to be present in the moment. And, I've heard people talk about, happiness is a habit, right? And things like, oh God, I'm living in my car. There are still things that if you forced yourself to focus on the right thing, you could be like, hey, at least I'm grateful for this, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And so I think it frustrates me because one of my failures that I have to constantly relearn, I think, is that, hey, it's okay to be positive even in a situation that doesn't feel pleasant.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with that, because
we're just having revelations today. That's what we're doing.
The thing is, right, is that when we're going through a trial or a tribulation, right, and we're uncomfortable. So one of my mentors is a gentleman named Blair Dunkley, and he's a genius in taking like very complex human behaviors and boiling them down to the simplest, most basic way of describing them. And he talks about the difference between comfort and safety. And we as human beings confuse the two a lot. And so we'll say, we'll do something because we're actually acting as if something isn't safe, when in reality it's just uncomfortable. And so we confuse that, and when we're making big changes in our lives, we say, oh, well, I can't do that. It doesn't feel safe to me. Well, you're not going to die if you do. You're not going to die if you move, right? The probability is pretty low. Is there a probability? Yeah, but it's pretty tiny. So you're safe in the whole concept of moving. You just may be uncomfortable with it. All right. So what does that mean, right? And it gives you the ability to start to be more introspective. And that's actually one of the things that I talk about a lot when it comes to negotiation. The most effective negotiators aren't like they're not master manipulators. They're not sweet talkers. They're not charmers. They are super connected with who they are. Like if somebody so just the cover of my book as an example, my editor had somebody design the cover of my book, and I got the cover, the concepts back, and I immediately had a visceral negative reaction to them. Now, the cover of the book is very similar to the cover art for my podcast. And I had not talked to my editor about using the podcast cover art as a model for the book cover or anything. And somebody else had designed the cover art. And so my editor's texting me, and she's like, what do you think? What do you think? And I'm like, I'm having a really negative reaction, and I don't know why. So I'm not going to respond to your emails and messages until I go and sit with that for a few minutes and figure out what is driving that. And what drove it, so I slept on it, figured it out. What drove it is my husband he used to work for DreamWorks Animation. Now he works for Skydance Animation. He's not an animator, but he's surrounded by artists. We live in Los Angeles. where people's art, whether it's fashion design, whether it's drawings, whether it's raw drawings, whether it's digitized drawings, whatever it is, matters.
Yeah.
And so I was very upset that they used the cover art designed by a different person as the foundation for the book without having permission from the original artist first. I felt as if we were stealing his work and not giving him credit. And so I reached out to him and said, hey, so the designer, the book cover designer wants to use the cover art as the foundation for the book. Are you okay with that? And I'll give you credit. I'll acknowledge you in the book. And he's like, he's in the Philippines. He's like just super stoked, right? He's like, that's so amazing, right? And so, but I had to take a step back, and the most effective negotiators do that. They are so self-aware that they go, ooh, this person just pushed a button. I'm not going to react to it. I'm going to go analyze it. I'm going to go sit with that and say, well, what about what that person just did or said has me feeling not so great. And then I'm going to call it out. If somebody does something that's that actually is intentionally or feels like it was intentional to push a button, I'll literally sit and say, so what you just did or said is causing me to, I'm reacting in this way to that. Was that your intended objective? Did you intend for me to react that way? Right? And most of the time, they'll say, no. Now, if somebody's lying to me, I'll generally know it, but it's like, but, and occasionally they'll get a sheepish grin and then I'll say, I thought so. So you got your desired reaction. Now, what outcome are you expecting as a result of it?
Wow.
So you got the reaction you wanted, but what outcome do you actually hope to achieve by it? Right? Because those are two very different questions. But if you're not introspective and you're not willing to analyze yourself, which is why, you know, and again, this concept comes from Blair Dunkley. He calls it self, other, and situation. So for me, it's what do I want? Am I clear about what I want, who I am, what gets me going? In terms of like, I just talked to a new client today, and they're looking to sell their company. And the first question I asked them was not, how much money do you want to get for it? The first question I asked was, in 5 years, when you drive past your office, what do you want the people in the community to be saying about it?
Yeah.
It's a very different question than how much money do you want? And that drives very, very different outcomes, right? So you've got to be really, you have to be really a student of yourself to understand what pushes your buttons, what gets you upset, what gets you hurt, what gets you, what elicits negative reactions, and then how are you gonna address them? How are you gonna deal with them? How are you gonna give yourself permission and grace to say, hey, yeah, that just really pissed me off, and I'm not liking that. That makes me want to kind of get up and not want to do business with you. Is that what you hope to achieve? And they're like, hell no, that's not what I wanted to achieve. And I'm like, well, that's what you got. So what are we going to do to fix it? Right.
That's like your superpower, your ability
it is one of my superpowers.
Go inward. I think a lot of us get really, really uncomfortable with questions like that. Like, one, all I can do is sit here and go, teach me your ways. But the other part of me knows that.
There you go.
No, I mean, I was assuming you did, but I just immediately, as soon as I go, hey, man, teach me your ways, I go, man, the way she's going to teach me is I'm going to be real uncomfortable because she's going to ask me these questions and I'm going to be like, hey, I don't know if I can answer these. I wonder too, and I'm being kind of silly, but I know there was a movie that came out like in the 90s called The Negotiator. And I wonder if people, before they like reach out and get to know you, if they're like, it's like the movie The Negotiator, right? Like saving lives. But the reality is you're just making people look at the necessary focus, right? To get their desired.
Yeah. I mean, so
I got to read your book. That's the thing. I got to read the book.
The easiest way so I'm trying to change how everybody thinks about what negotiation is. Negotiation is a conversation about a relationship, and you cannot win a relationship, but you can get more value out of it. And all negotiation is figuring out, what are the terms of our relationship? How are we going to interact together in a way that creates more value, emotional, financial, however you're defining value, that creates more value for both of you, for all of you in the negotiation, right? Once we stop thinking about negotiation, and I mean, I love Getting to Yes is an amazing book. And I was taught by some of the people who wrote that book or who contributed to that book. But it's very process oriented, and it ignores the fact that we are human beings with emotions. It's very structured, it's very processed, it's very prescriptive. And it's like, but we're all human beings. Spend some time figuring out, like I have a negotiation coming up this week. And it's my first meeting with the counterpart. And the first question, one of the first questions I will ask is, when we walk away from this table and we have a deal, and you say that's an amazing deal for us, what does that deal look like? What's in that deal? Because I want to understand can we get to that? Can we get them their ideal deal, and can we get me my perfect deal?
But is most of the time money the answer? Like, they'll be like, we walk away with this amount of money. No.
That's the price.
Oh man, they're like, we're gonna have dogs on every floor and every desk. Right?
And this has been proven out through research. Many different research studies have been done on what motivates people to buy and to sell. And money, while in the top 5, is number 5. There are usually 4 other things that surpass the importance of dollars. So if somebody's, let's say somebody's selling a company, right? It could be what happens to their employees. It could be what happens to their brand. It could be what happens to their customer list. And money may come into that, but maybe they've got a pension that they're trying to fund. Maybe they want to make sure that that you're going to pay health insurance to their employees, right? There's all sorts of other things. Maybe it's a family-owned business and they want you to keep some of the family employed, right? There are just so many different things. Even customers, right? There's an organization called the Institute for Supply Management, and they've done research that, in certain categories, people can raise price as much as 40% before somebody will change to switch to a new buyer, new supplier. Because, oh my God, if you're using a contract manufacturer to manufacture a product, right, and they raise their price, what's my switching cost? Okay, so they raise my price 10%. It's going to cost me a lot more than 10% to change to a new supplier, because that new supplier, I have to train them. They may have to kit equipment. They got to buy product and, materials, all that kind of stuff, right? This is part of negotiation is being very clear about who you are and what you need, but you also have to be really clear on what your counterpart needs and wants to be successful. What does their business look like, or what does their situation look like, and how are they going to define success? And I talk about how I bought 2 brand new cars for the price of one plus $5,000. Literally walked into a dealership and offered to buy 2 cars, but I was only going to pay for one. I was going to drive 2 cars off their lot that night, but I was only going to give them the money for one of them. Right. And I figured, I studied their business. Was this doable? Was it possible? Was it possible for a dealer to sell me 2 cars for the price of one? And I discovered that it was. Right. I researched the car. I researched the market. I researched how they made money. I researched how they sold. I researched how the manager works versus the salesperson, how they sell to men versus how they sell to women. I looked at all that stuff. And, after the manager stopped being ticked off at me about trying to buy 2 cars for the price of one, I shared with him my math. I said, here's why I think it's possible. And why I actually think not only is it possible, but I actually think it's a good deal for you to sell me 2 of these types of cars off your lot, for me to drive these 2 cars off your lot. This is why. This is what my math says. Where's my math wrong? My math was wrong on the cost of holding inventory, and it was wrong by about $5,000. So I increased my offer by $5,000. And in one night, we drove off the lot with 2 brand new cars for the price of one plus $5,000.
Okay, so was this like a Lexus and a BMW? Was this like two of the same car? Like you were like, hey, I want 2 Lexus,
Yeah, it was
same model, same everything.
It was 2 of the same car, and it was not. I hated this car, by the way.
No.
My husband loved
Oh
it.
no.
And you had
It
2
was
of them.
We did. It was a Honda Element. And so a Honda Element is a 4-seater car. You can hose the thing out. It's fully waterproof inside. It's great for camping or 21 and throwing up in. And, you know, and that was really the market, was people under 30. And we drive manual transmissions. So not a lot of people drive manual transmissions, and fewer people under 30 drive manual transmissions, right? And so there were a lot of things, but this is the importance of understanding what it is that you're trying to do, what your objective is. This is the importance of understanding the situation that you're negotiating, right? So we've talked about we talked about the counterpart, but you also have to understand the situation you're negotiating. And the situation I was negotiating is that this dealer, because I had looked for a dealer who had the most manual transmission Honda Elements on their lot, right? And we were living in Boston at the time. Fewer than 7% of New Englanders drove manual transmissions at the time. So they had a pretty small number of people who were going to be walking on that lot looking to buy a manual transmission Honda Element of the year that had just ended, right? It was the second week of January. And so it was a really small number. So getting those 2 cars off their lot in the same day freed that space up for 2 brand new vehicles that had a higher probability of selling. So it was a really good deal for them. And just before the pandemic started, I was in an Uber, and the guy was a car dealer. He was a car salesperson. He had car dealer plates on his car. And I told him this story, and he said, oh yeah, I can see how that had happened. Totally doable. Right? Just like at the beginning of 2020.
That's
right?
crazy.
I have a weird feeling that what's going to make us, I guess we'll call it viral, is people are going to go, so then I heard this story about how this woman went onto a car lot and bought 2 cars for the price of one.
It'll just be a bunch of people
$5,000.
trying to do that like over and over again. And you missed the point. You got to research it.
You're right.
Yeah.
And then we get like a phone call from Honda being like, hey, we kind of appreciate the advertising, but
well, they don't sell that car anymore. They don't make that car anymore.
People keep asking for Honda Elements.
Yeah, I'm gonna go find a manual Honda Element just so I can have a picture like on the front of our podcast of me being like, look guys, I found one.
Well, if you go to Denver, they're one of the hottest cars in Denver. And I have friends who have them. And one of my friends drove to Tennessee to buy them because they are such in-demand vehicles in Colorado, because they're perfect for skiing and snowboarding and outdoor activities and all that kind of stuff. And
because they're waterproof.
They are literally waterproof. You literally can hose the whole thing.
I'm gonna have to tell my dad. My dad just bought a house in Colorado. Be like, you need to go get a Honda Element, and there you go. Good to go.
You might have to drive to Tennessee for it, but
maybe he could get 2.
Yeah, right. Gosh. So one thing, while we have you here, so now I'm trying to wrap my head around negotiating, right? And if I read your book or take your class or get on the internet and I start learning or start teaching myself negotiating, are you saying that as your skills got better, like you can literally apply what you know and that skill set in like anything? Like anything is negotiable. Okay, I'm saying that all sorts of wrong.
I could see where it's going. I was like, negotiable? Like that's what was about to come out.
Negotiable. Yeah, but you know what I'm saying? Of when you get to the certain point, can you negotiate anything?
So there are a couple things, in my opinion, that are non-negotiable.
Okay.
So most of them are like mountains, oceans, waterfalls, rivers. You can't negotiate those, but you can navigate them. But the thing that's really not negotiable for me are my values. Right now, even for my company, I actually have my corporate values like written out. They're like right here. I turn and look at them all the time. Right. So I know that there are certain things that if I don't see it in a deal or in the person, right? Because values are personal, they're not corporate, they're personal. And that's the thing that people forget. You're never negotiating with a company. You're always negotiating with a human being. Now, actually, let me rephrase that, because some companies like Walmart and stuff have started deploying artificial intelligence into their network to start negotiating what are called long tail contracts, which are small dollar value contracts that automatically renew. And they're starting to use AI to negotiate those. So while most of us negotiate with people, we are going to be starting to be negotiating with machines. And so everybody should be getting prepared for that.
That terrifies me for some reason.
It does me too, because especially for small businesses, it's a huge disadvantage for smaller businesses, because the things that small business bring to the table are not things. There's a quantitative aspect
that would translate to an AI, like
right. That's a miss. Like the speed with which to respond to a change, right? Or certain quality factors, different. It's just the challenging. Actually, for my show, I want to interview somebody a CEO of a contract management system that's uses AI to get a better handle on that and its implications for small businesses. But the thing is that values, shouldn't be your values should not be negotiable. Those should be your guiding principles for how and whom you do business with. And if a matter of fact, I fired a client not long ago because she, well, it wasn't really the client, it was his wife, but she insinuated herself into a business deal, and his original objective was preserve the relationship. So it was a partnership that was fractured. And he's like, I want out of the partnership, but I want to preserve the relationship. She comes in all guns a-blazing, hell bent for leather. And she's like, well, I think we should take him for all we got and da, 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 da. And I'm like, I'm out. I'm all about relationship, right? If somebody is like, fuck the relationship, I'm like, I'm not your person. Go find a Barracuda attorney who's going to go in at all costs. I'm not that person. I don't believe in that. I just, that does not work for me.
I feel that a lot because I work in corporate America too. And it's vendor relationships, supplier relationships, all of that. A lot of people will come in with the intent of, I'm protecting my business. I don't care about your business. This is what I need, and you're going to give it to me. And it's very strange to see those dynamics because it's like, but you want our business, right? Like you want to work together. So it's wild, but I think it's kind of an old school view on it, that it's like a dog eat dog corporate world, and you have to fight tooth and nail for what you need. But like you said, you're trying to transition people into thinking, oh no, this is a two-way street. It's not a one-way where you can just go around and around. Like we have to work together, and both parties can benefit mutually and come to a middle ground instead of two wildly different situations. Yeah.
I think the story that like really kind of hit home for me is I attended a webinar with the CEO of BioNTech. So BioNTech they partnered with Pfizer to do the COVID vaccine. People's views on COVID vaccine don't care about with respect to this conversation, but they partnered with Pfizer and a third company. There was a third company in that partnership. They did not have commercial terms, meaning who's going to get paid what and when and how, ironed out for 9 months. They worked collaboratively for 9 months before they knew how anybody was going to get paid out of working on that project. And the CEO of BioNTech said that that experience will change how they negotiate, because my view is that it used to be that people cared more about the relationship in a negotiation. I mean, the notion of over contracting, like putting, the kitchen sink in a contract. And COVID taught us that throwing the kitchen sink into a contract to try to mitigate risk is ineffective, because you cannot account for everything. There's always something the universe is going to throw at you that you didn't think about. Nobody is that smart, right? Or you don't have access to the information. I mean, the epidemiologists knew that something like COVID was coming, but nobody else was paying attention, right? And so nobody had it in their contracts, right? So the CEO of BioNTech was like, this is going to change how we think about things. And I talk about how, the two greatest things, the two biggest obstacles to successful deal making and successful negotiations is that we don't ask for what we want. We tell ourselves, we come up with all sorts of excuses as to, oh my God, if I ask for that thing I want, then that customer is going to walk out the door because someone else, we create this whole story in our head that's bullshit, but we create it in our head and we convince ourselves because we're worried about safety when we're actually just uncomfortable, right? So why not ask? So that's part one. But the other thing we do is the majority of people go into negotiations, and Megan, you actually said it, believing that our counterpart is out to get us.
Oh yeah.
That we cannot trust our counterpart, that our counterpart certainly does not have our interests at heart. But what would it be like if you actually walked into your next negotiation asking your counterpart, how do I make this deal work for you? And what do you think would happen?
I think it's so much smoother when everyone's trying to, work together.
You're going to have conflict. There's always conflict in every relationship. Has conflict. Every relationship. So people who are conflict avoidant, you kind of just got to figure it out because you're going to have conflict in any relationship. Really great relationships always have conflict. Out of conflict, great ideas. Necessity is the mother of invention. Conflict creates the opportunity for great ideas and great solutions. And, but we have to, if we don't start trusting or believing that our counterpart is interested in our success as well, then what are we really doing?
I was about to say trust is a huge part of that because it's kind of just a paranoia, like walking into that meeting room of, oh, I have all these bullet points because I know they're going to ask for this. They absolutely cannot have that. Instead of saying, why do they want this? Why do they need it? Should I consider it? How can we work that in? And trusting there's no malintent or we're going to get the better end of this deal. That's what I hear a lot is like, they either screwed us in this deal or we got the better end of it or whatever. Why not like meet in the middle somewhere? That's kind of what a deal is supposed to be. Like, that's how I always understood it.
Well, and I love the whole thing of like applying this to a relationship. I mean, it doesn't have to be like a lover either, like a friendship, family relationship, whatever. Of like, all right, listen, right? Because part of it's, knowing what your boundaries are, right? But like, gosh, like just sitting down and being like, look, this isn't a fight, this isn't an argument, right? Like we're just going to sit down and let's negotiate. Because I think a lot of people, as soon as they hear that word of like, I don't know how to negotiate, like what am I going to do with that? And they're like, just sit down and negotiate it out. What's so crazy, meeting you today is the fact that what you're doing with negotiating is what we have the idea of doing with failure. Is that we've identified that everyone is looking at this completely wrong. And it's like, hey, like we need to tell people this. And it's like, well, how do you tell people?
Do they like, yeah.
Right? Like, do I get a tattoo on my forearm? And then I go, hey, look, failure's okay, right? And I guess this one needs to say negotiating's okay too, right? I just 2 forearm tats. I'll write it down. We'll see what happens.
I love it. I mean, the thing is that we actually, when I speak in front of audiences, I'll ask people, who has a kid, who's got children, who's got nieces or nephews or grandkids, and then who was a kid. Because if you look at any self-respecting 7-year-old, which are pretty much all of them, they're incredible negotiators. We were all really good negotiators when we were little. We didn't know enough not to ask. So we asked, right? We knew to ask one adult in one way, another adult in a different way. And this other adult, we can't ask either those two ways. So that's not going to get me anywhere what I want. So we knew how to adjust and we figured that out, right? But over time, as we got older, and there was actually a study out of Boston College that for girls, they actually looked at how boys and girls negotiate. Boys negotiate evenly with men and women from the age of 3 through 10, but girls begin to stop negotiating with men starting as early as 8. And so we start at around the ages of 8 or 9. We start hearing these words. We put more emphasis on the words we hear, and we hear no more. We are being told how to behave or how to do certain things. And in order to reduce the amount of conflict, we start to conform. And as we start to conform, we start losing those skills that we had at 7 of not being, of literally being fearless in our asking, of asking for, whatever question popped into our head. I as we kind of disconnect with certain memories, but I'm reminded of how when I was a little girl, my dad's boss, who owned the ranch that my dad worked on, I used to question everything. I was so curious, and that is my number one company value, is curiosity. I was so curious. I wanted to know everything about everything and what was going on in the moment and ideas and things. I just loved learning. But my dad's boss used to call me Miss Bedinsky, because I'd butt into every conversation because I was so hungry to learn. I just wanted to learn. But all I heard was Miss Bedinsky, and my parents started calling me that. My brother started calling me that. So I quit asking questions, because questions got me made fun of, right? And so I've had to relearn how to ask. And what taught me to ask was being homeless and pregnant and having to rely on people in order to survive, having to ask people for their help, for their guidance, for their direction, right? Because I knew if I didn't find somebody else who could give me answers, I didn't have the answers. So I had to ask for what I wanted. I had to ask, right? I turned down a job because I didn't disclose to them to craft foods. I turned down a job from them because I hadn't told them that I was a mom, and I felt like I was that I was a single mom, and I felt like I was being dishonest, right? I was so uncomfortable in that because I didn't ask. I didn't ask them, hey, how do I work with you as a single mom, with 3 little kids, right? In White Plains, New York, how do I make this work? I made assumptions. I assumed that it wasn't possible. I told myself it wasn't possible. I told myself that I was lying to them. So why not ask? Why not ask? And why not take a risk? Take the chance and create a space that allows you to trust your counterpart, where you demonstrate that you are going to operate in as much of their best interests as you possibly can, insofar as it doesn't destroy your own, right? And what happens when we try that? What does that world look like? And we're going to have to fail to get to it.
Oh yeah,
is
the perfect tie back.
Yeah, and it brings me to the story that's a little bit of both, but for the failure piece, it's more of a fear of failure. In the last few years in the job I was in, I was just feeling like I should be paid more, that kind of moment of like, I'm not being compensated for what I'm giving. But I'm pretty like fresh in my career still. Like, you always, when you're younger, you feel like I have to do this grunt work for a while. I shouldn't ask for things. I shouldn't like overdo it until I have the experience behind me. So I kind of held off on it for a little bit. And then came the fear of like, what if they say no if I ask more? Are they going to hold it against me? Is it going to be this thing of like, why did she think she got more when no one else asked for it? And I went back and forth for like a while. And then finally, I don't know if it was the frustration of like, this is bugging me, or just not giving a fuck anymore and being like, I don't care if I fail. Like, that was scary for a while. Like, I kept thinking through all of it. I don't care anymore in this scenario. If they don't value me in this moment, it's just not going to matter. So I put together like a well thought out paper, like a 1-pager on this is why I deserve a higher salary. And then I researched like a handful of these are similar positions in the area. This is what they make. Here's the average. Here is my current salary. This is the percent I expect. And just laid it all out, no emotion, just very like, this is what it is. And then I just went into my vice president's office and I was like, hi, how are you? I just wanted to have a quick conversation. And we did. And he was very receptive. And he kind of sat on it for a little bit, and that fear came back. He said he'd get back to me. And this was all mid-COVID, just to give context. So I was like, I'm asking for money when people don't have jobs. Like, I don't know how this is gonna, they're gonna laugh me out the door and be like, all right, you're next. And he came back a month later finally and was like, yeah, you totally deserve this. I'm sorry it took so long. And I was like, no, it kind of just reconfirmed everything for me. All that self-doubt and like failure kind of seeping in. What's the worst that could have happened? They weren't going to fire me for asking for a raise. Like, yeah, it gets worked out.
I tried basically the same thing, but my one page like paper and research was I kicked in the office door and I just started screaming demands, and they were like,
and that didn't work.
And I didn't understand the "you're done" part, so I went back to my desk, and then they escorted me out. But I'm still waiting for a touch base moment. Maybe I got it, maybe I didn't. No, and that's a great story. It's interesting having that thought instigated of, when did I start trying to conform more, right? When did that happen for me? And why? And so, that's a bunch that I'm going to have to go unpack, but I'll do that later, guys. The thing is hopefully this will inspire a lot of people to at least start asking the questions within, who am I? Because I was kind of thinking about what some of my values are. And I know the ones that have been with me for a really long time, but have some of those changed, or have I added new ones that maybe I haven't even done inventory about? And I'm like, geez, I got a lot of homework to do after this podcast. I'm excited.
I do have the journey.
Oh yeah.
You gotta and be in love with the process. Which we are coming to that point of the episode, and I did want to ask a question that I find very interesting, and that's, for our guests, do you have like a one tidbit of advice or a piece of information that you think maybe people don't think about or have that you would like to share before we wrap things up?
Yeah, I mean, so I am a child of the 80s. And so, one of my favorite Depeche Mode songs comes to mind, try walking in my shoes, right? You never know how somebody defines failure. You never know what failures they've had. You don't know the experiences, right? I know my husband better than anyone else in the world except my husband. I've never walked in his shoes, right? I'm that close to him after we're so close, but I've never walked in his shoes. And so yet we assume when we meet somebody or we're at the negotiation table with somebody that we know them, and we don't. Just remember that you've not walked in their shoes. Get curious about who they are and what motivates them and drives them, and figure that out, and give them permission to share that with you.
Wow, that was good. And I love that you brought that band up, because perfect.
Well, for me, it's a 90s band, because I didn't hear them ever until the 1990s. So my husband and he teases me. He's like, it's an 80s band. I'm like, I don't listen to 80s music. I only listen to 90s music. And I didn't hear Depeche Mode till the 90s. So for me, they're a 90s band.
It's perfect, right? It fits the timeline. No, and that's wonderful. I think I called them, if I remember this correctly, I think I tried to play it off as a joke, but I called them Depeche Mode one time, and of course nobody went, yeah, that's the name of that band.
There you go.
Yeah, but I'm a sucker for saying words wrong. That's
Depeche a la mode might work.
That's even better.
I like that.
She just wrote it for you.
Yeah, I'm like taking notes from the master. No, awesome. That was a great thought right there. I've really enjoyed having you on here today. I have to ask you that question, or I'm never going to know, even though we both know I'm going to look this up. Your book it's new.
Yes, but it is
Is
available.
it on Audible?
So I'm actually recording the audio version on Tuesday. So it will be available on audio. Right now it is available on Kindle and in paperback.
Perfect.
There you go. So coming soon.
Yeah.
We should have the audio out in the next few weeks. So
That's exciting. That's the most convenient way to read these days for me, is to listen to it, which is ironic because I'm taking out the whole point of reading, right? But that is exciting. I'm glad that I know it's coming to Audible. Awesome. Megan, you know what time it is?
It is that time, outro time. So we are on all socials. And then Christine, did you have any socials you wanted to call out where people can find you?
yeah, you can find us on YouTube at Venn Negotiation. LinkedIn is Venn Negotiation. Pretty much anything that's Venn Negotiation, you can find us.
Just Google Venn Negotiation.
Google Venn Negotiation or Christine McKay, and you'll find me.
Perfect.
And
then I just want to encourage our viewers, listeners, however you're consuming this, please rate us, roast us, whatever you want to do. Let us know if we're good, bad, indifferent, somewhere in the middle. And then if you enjoy it, give us a subscribe or a follow, and we'll promise not to annoy you. And then if you're listening, you can find us on YouTube as well at Friends of Failure. And our favorite part is asking to send in your fails. We want to share other people's stories, and this can be anonymous. We can put your full name and social security number on there, however you want to do it. This is either through email or phone. So you can email us at friendsoffailurepodcast@gmail.com or call our voicemail, which we've named Ethel. We're hoping some little old lady is getting all of these and having a laugh. You can call at 916-304-3345.
I think what's really important is that Ethel does not judge. That's what's so great about her, is she's just hearing stories, yeah, definitely check us out, guys. So here's my thing. I always like to leave us with a quote, and it comes from 2008 Facebook.
Oh my God.
And that is
that
life is happening for you, not to you. So go out there and fail, and maybe negotiate. You should try that too.
That's probably a good idea.
If it's not I'm stronger than you, it's I'm wiser than you, I'm more loving than you, I'm more tolerant than you, I'm more sophisticated than you. It doesn't matter what it is, but this constant competition is going on. This is the secret. This is the secret. You can't make a mistake.